Today I'm going to continue what's become a series of videos on DataGraph version 5.1, and I'm going to show you how to take the raw data that we looked at last time and create the graph that you see here. So this is a sequence of data for 3 different sites, but then we're going to use the summary statistics that we calculated to show you how to plot the mean point with the standard deviation. I've also got a median value in here. Finally, I'm going to combine these into a nice looking composite graph where I feel like you have the best of both worlds, both the summary statistics as well as the raw data that you see here. I'm going to be using DataGraph version 5.1.1 for this, and I hope you stay with me. I'll show you how to do this step by step from beginning to end. To start, I want to show you how to get the data that I'm going to be using for this. And in fact, we did upload a brand new example file. If you go into the DataGraph file, online examples, you'll see this window and go to the file called summary statistics. Open this up and you'll see the graphs that I showed you initially. And this is what we're going to be recreating. This data is actually the same data that I used in the last video that I did, where I showed you how to take raw columns of data where I have multiple columns like you see here, and to use the built-in functions to do calculations of summary statistics. So that's what is in this data table. Now, one thing to be aware of is that we also used some redirect columns. I showed you how to set that up for one, and here I've set that up for all 3 columns. So my site names are longer, but I have these redirect columns set up to give me shorter names, which makes it easier to use these in expressions. And that's how I do these calculations in the data table, where I have an expression that uses the name of my columns. I could use the names here, but just note that if they're longer and with space, well, if they have a space in them, you have to put quotes around them. I don't need to do that here because of my very short column names that I use for my redirects. This is, again, similar to an alias. But watch that last video if you want more information on how this is set up. And I guess the main thing that what sort of inspired me for this particular video and to show you how to make these graphs is that I actually made a mistake when I told you in the last video that there were 2 new built-in functions in 5.1. There are actually 3 new built-in functions, and I neglected to mention the fact that the standard deviation was also added. Now, I guess just a quick aside that these types of calculations for summary statistics are in DataGraph in other places as well, the pivot command, the box plot, but those take data that's in a long format, not a wide format where you have many, many columns of data, and that's what these new built-in functions do. Yeah, well, the standard deviation being one of the new ones, the sum is the other one that's new, the other min, max, median, they were in here before, but because now you can calculate the standard deviation in a column like this, I thought it would be useful to show you how I can use that in a graph. So that's really kind of the main point of this, is to, well, show you how to do some graphing. It's always good to demo some graphing with DataGraph, but also to make sure you know how to use the standard deviation when you want to put error bars around a point within a graph. So that's what we're going to work on. And we'll start by creating this first graph here. The first thing that I would recommend that you do is to take these columns of data and put them in a brand new file so that you can start from scratch. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go over to my column list that I have on the left-hand side, and I can do a Command A to select all of them. You can see how now these are all highlighted. Once they're selected, I can just copy them, go to a new file that I've already set up, and then paste all of those objects in, and then you see all of the data that are here. In order to create this first plot of the raw data, I'm going to use a plots command, but I want to pre-select the data. So I will click on the month column. That's going to be my my X value, and click on the subsequent columns that are my Y values, I can hold down the Command key and then just click the header of all 3 of these. Notice I am using the redirect columns, not the raw data. I could actually use the raw data, but I want to show you what happens with the redirect columns. And I can go now to Draw, select to add a plots command. And this, if you expand this, you'll see there's a table essentially inside this that shows what the 3 plots are that are being drawn. I can change the colors for them here, but there's also a handy shortcut. If you click the gear menu, there's color suggestions, and I can just select set 1 to have all my colors set to those colors. I might want to make this line a little bit thicker. And what I did here was I added different points to each one in order to make sure that these were distinguishable even if I'm not in color. And the other thing that I did here is, well, of course, I added an X title, added a Y title. And one thing to notice is that if you look onto the axis labels itself, let me see if I can zoom this in. See how it starts at 0 and it goes up to 13? Well, these are month IDs, so I don't have a 0 month or a 13th month. And one sort of easy way to deal with that is to, I didn't mean to make myself disappear, is to change the padding that goes between, let me turn that off, change the padding, which is the distance between where you have data and where you have the edge of your graph. So this is the X padding. You can do this in the axis settings. You see how there is the option for padding for X. Change this from nice value to 5%. And now I just have the 1 to 12 marked on my x-axis, which is just what I want here. The last thing I will add is a legend. I'm going to do that by, you can click the legend command to add the legend. And I want this to be anchored in the upper left, so I'll change that anchoring. You can also just click on it if you want to change the width. But the key thing I want you to notice is that the labeling in the legend is not the name of the redirect column, it's the name of the original raw data. So the redirect columns are set up to be used again as kind of a pass-through mechanism. So when I am using them in a graph like this, then it's not going to show the redirect names, it's going to show the original names. And these are handy if you want to be able to easily swap out what data column you're using. You can do that within these redirects. These have a menu to show you the column that's there, and so you can change that, and then everything is going to update accordingly. Okay, so there's our first graph is done. Now I'm back in my example file, and I want to show you how to use the standard deviation to have error bars around a point. Go into our new file again and add a new graph. So there's actually 2 commands that I want to point this out for, because basically the same mechanism works in either. So first of all, we could do a plot command. So say I have the month and the mean, and I make a line plot of that data. I could add, for example, a point to this and expand that out, because notice up at the top, there's nowhere to select some error bars or standard deviation. But down at the bottom, you'll see that there is an option for error bars. And what you do is you'll need to change this from error to one of these selections. There's actually a lot of different options for how you can draw error bars in various ways, both in the Y direction and the X direction. But here I'm going to choose tiny bars. Nothing happens yet because I haven't said what data to use, but what did happen is I now have this new section added to the bottom of this command that shows me the option of adding an error in X or an error in Y. And these are menu selectors, so I could use these to select a column. I actually find it from this perspective because I have the standard deviation showing here in my data table, I can actually just click on my header and drag this down to the error in Y selection. And now I have my error bars. And again, this is on the plot command. I can do the same exact thing with a points command. So let me just hide this one for a moment and show you same thing. If I do month and the mean, I plot those points, expand this out. You'll change the error style to some type of bars, and then I can set the error in Y to that value. So it's the same mechanism in both the plot command and the points command. If you want to go back into the original file and look at, well, what commands did I use here? You can hover over on the left-hand side of any of these icons, and it will tell you which command I use. So I use the points command here. This one's a plot command. This is another points command. So if I want to recreate that here, I could actually change this plot command to just take away the bars. I'm not going to have that in this one. And this is just going to, actually, let me unhide it. This will have no point, but only show me the line. And I'm going to change this color to something that is a much lighter gray color, just to let you connect these visually, but without being too overwhelming. With my mean point, what I did in the original file is I actually changed this to a solid marker and changed the color of the marker also to red. I thought that looked nice. And then adding the median, again, I can do that with the points command as well, to go here, select these two columns, and now add a points command. And you will see I'm now getting very close to mimicking what I had in that original file. Let me just zoom in on this for a moment, though, because one detail that you'll notice is that when I'm overlaying now these various layers for these commands, that the median points are completely covering the red color for the mean. In my original file, you won't see that, and that's because you need to go over here, and the fill color for the median point is set using this, this second color right here. This is the color for the fill. So if I click on this, you see that there's an option to select no color, and now I'm getting the look that I was hoping for, which is make the points a little bit bigger, which is the median is just an outline, and when the two overlap, you actually see the outline around the red point, which is the mean point. Okay, so let me go ahead and zoom this out. Oops, again, I'm disappearing myself. Zoom this out, and let's see what else we had. Actually, the settings from here, from my first graph, I can actually select this and copy them, go to my new graph and paste them in. Now I have the proper settings for my month tick marks. I have the month label there. In my file online, though, I don't have the word values here. I actually typed in mean plus or minus the standard deviation. And let me show you how I do that, because that's over here in the Y title. And I actually use a text formatting shortcut. This is, if you're familiar with the LaTeX typesetting language, this is using a LaTeX type of a text string. So here it is what it's shown, mean/PM. This is for plus minus standard deviation. And when you type that in, and I'll just go, I don't think I actually did the copy. Let me do a copy and come over here to my Y value and paste that in. And now you see how this gives me the plus or minus symbol. So if you're familiar with LaTeX, there's a number of LaTeX symbols that natively work, or shortcuts that work within DataGraph. If you're not, you can also use Unicode characters. So I could copy and paste this from the character map, and that would also work. Okay. What do I have left here to do? Well, I have to add the legend, so I can click on the legend command, and I'm going to also move this to the upper left, make this maybe a little bit narrower. But notice the other thing that I did was I also had the mean plus or minus standard deviation shown within my legend. So I can do that by expanding out my points command. You'll see where the legend name is, and I'm going to do the same thing here. It'd be /PM, put 2 spaces, because the first space actually doesn't register as a space. You've got to put 2 after the LaTeX command. And now we see the mean plus standard deviation in my legend. But what happened? Well, my line now shows up as a separate mean plus or minus standard deviation. And I don't want it there as a separate line. I actually want them kind of collapsed into one. So to make that work, you just have to have the same exact legend for both of them. So I expanded out my legend, or expanded out the command for the plot, where I have just the gray line drawn. And if I change the legend here to be the same as the text from the point with the error bars, notice how then there's only one entry in the legend and it overlaps them. You could also just delete this if you didn't want the gray line showing at all. Maybe to make this a little bit clearer, I can also show you how you can expand the legend and have the legend size change from standard to wide. And now you can, I think, see a little bit better how that gray line is part of this, showing that the gray line, in my mind at least, it's a way to indicate that the gray line is what's connecting the mean points. Okay, so we've got this one. Now the next thing we'll do is combine them. There's really multiple ways that you could go about combining these 2 graphs that I've made into one, where I have the split between them. But I'm going to show you sort of my preferred technique for this. So first of all, let's just click this button to add a new graph. And what I'm going to have you do is split in the Y direction. So there's a button here that you can just click that once. And when you do, now you'll see that your drawing canvas has these 2 different sections where you can place commands and draw them in either one. I've also got this additional object that's been added here. This is the object that represents this second axis that was added. Okay, so go back now to your graphs that you created. And what I want you to do is to highlight the objects. So you click and drag to highlight them, and then put them in a group. And I'm just going to give these, a simple name here, raw data. And actually, I wanted to do the same thing for the title, so that I label my graphs. Adding the title, you just hover your mouse over it, and then you just click there, and we can again add another title here. And let me just put this in my clipboard so I can paste this in, so that here, same thing, I'm going to click and drag to highlight all my commands, put them in a group, and then I'll give them this name. You don't necessarily have to name them, but it certainly helps you to keep track of them. Now I want to place these groups onto my new graph that I have the split view, split y-axis in. And what I can actually do is let's go back to the first one. Click on the grouped object itself. Notice I'm clicking here over near the icon. This is really the easiest way to make sure you're selecting these properly. And then when you have it selected, actually click and drag it and drop it right here on the icon of the new graph. That moves all your commands here, and it places it at the bottom graph. I'm going to do the same thing for my group here. Click on the group, drag it and drop it on my new graph. What it will do by default, what you can see just happened, is it placed everything on the bottom graph. This is considered the number 1 location. If you have multiple x-axes, it will place it in the bottom left corner graph. But you'll also see here that I have these selectors that show me where things are. These are all highlighting the bottom graph, which is where all the commands are currently located. Now, one thing I wanted to do was to let's see, do a Shift Command D. Oh, actually, this is another new thing in the latest version of DataGraph. So if you do Shift Command D, that swaps the data with the command. So you can see the list of commands in a much longer view here. Makes it easier to see everything at once. The same shortcut is available under the View menu where you have Swap Layout. Anyway, I thought this was a handy thing to add this shortcut. So Shift Command D is a quick way to swap the two of them. And what I want to do here now is I want to move as a group. So I don't need to click all of these individually. I can use my group to quickly click on the gear menu, and there's a move commands to y-axis, select axis 2, and then that moves everything as a group up to this top axis. Especially if you have a lot of axes and a lot of commands, this can just make it very quick to move things around and composite them into graphs like this. The other thing that you'll notice, however, is that my legends no longer show just the data for that graph. The legend command by default will show every command that's within a graph in its list. This is an easy fix though. We can go into each legend command and you'll see that if you expand this open, go to the option that says, let me turn off my keystrokes here, the option that says from axis and change it from all to same axis. That changed the bottom one. We're going to do the same exact thing for the second legend command, same axis. And now this is exactly what I wanted. So my legends are just showing the items that are on that axis that data is drawn on. Okay, a couple of other things that we're going to need to do. Again, we'll need to set our labels and fix this issue with the months. We don't want month 0 shown. So again, I can go back to my other graph. I can select the axis settings, do a Command C, click my new thumbnail, and then do a Command V to paste those settings in. So that overwrites my settings from before. Now again, it's going to place the things, when you put them in, it's going to relate to the first graph first. So it placed the label I had down to on graph 1. I'm actually just going to cut that, put that into the Y label for graph 2. Just type this in. So I have my other Y label. There it is, values. But the other thing that we did when you look at the original version or the online example is you'll see that the size of the graph is also set. So this is really now when I'm getting to the final bit of formatting, I really want to make sure everything is sized properly for my graph when I output it and put it in my document. So here I'm going to have this graph set to 7 inches by, I believe 5 inches was the final, was the size that I have set in that example file. So there's just a little bit of formatting that you might want to do here. 12-point font maybe is a little bit big for a graph, for the text in a graph. You might want to change that down to 10-point. That's probably what I would do. Other things you might want to do is, oops, I actually didn't want to drag that. I just want to change the sizes of these here, but you also might want to change some of the relative sizing. So in the example file, if you go into the style settings, this is where you will find the option for relative sizes for all the different elements that are in your graph. Here I'm going to change the axis font to be a little bit smaller. I'll also change the label font to be a little bit smaller. And when I make the label font smaller, that actually changes the legends themselves. The legend font is included in the label font group by default. So that made that a little smaller. So now I think I have a nice balanced graph. One of the last things I did actually in the final version of this is, for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to remove the minor tick marks just to give it a little bit of a clean look. So you can do that in your in your style settings. Uncheck the where you have the tick mark options. Uncheck the box for minor, and now you'll see those minor tick marks disappear on both axes. So that's a global setting across all the axes that you have within a graph. And I think now this is pretty much the end. Oh, actually, the last thing I would do here as I look at this is I would probably change the point size to be a little bit smaller. Maybe a 6 point would be good. And notice that it's changing all of them globally because I didn't change any of the commands from the default, which is the point settings. If you look, for example, on the plot command, this is where you'll find the point settings. It has a slider where you could change these on their own, but if you leave it set to the word point, then it will respond to the global point setting up at the top of the style settings. The space between the edge and the y-axis is something that we also want to set. That's a setting that is within our axis settings. It's contained both in the main axis setting. Here it is, for space for y. And I also have the same thing here, space for y. They're both set to medium. Actually, as a shortcut, you don't have to necessarily expand the axis settings. You can just do a control click or a right click onto the axis itself. So notice I do this right on the axis. I have a touchpad, so I'm doing 2 fingers on the touchpad. There you will see the option for Y space, set it to narrow. That changed one of them. They actually have to both be set to narrow. And then that will decrease that space on the left-hand side. So I think that makes a nice balanced looking graph. Lastly, I just wanted to comment a bit on what I'm planning to do on the next video, because here what we did is we used the new standard deviation built-in function to calculate standard deviation across multiple columns and showed you how you can use that in both the plot and the points command to show error bars around points. We also added in DataGraph 5.1 the ability to calculate a confidence interval from data. This is going to use the box command. So this is different than what we did here in terms of the format of the data that we're going to require. But that's what I'm planning to do for the next video so that you can see how that works. And until then, hope that this was helpful. And if so, please give us a like and consider subscribing so that you see when that next video is released.